Farnsworth, Susan Corbett, Tom French, David Hall, Doug Howard, Dan Kaminsky, John McMichael, Earl Shepard, Nina Spinelli, and Mary Weber are on the committee. I'd like to welcome everybody, but I'd also like to say that I really had a great time in Charleston, and I know everybody else did too, and I think we should have meetings in Charleston 4 or 5 times a year. It's a great place.
I second the motion.
Yeah, and we really got a treat out at the old naval base out there for the WIN
That was great.
program out there, and then we got to go in and see the Hunley, and that was just an added treat.
Oh, did they finally get you in? I left. I didn't know. They got you in?
Yeah, well, they finally got us in. They got us in a room that overlooked. We didn't go, but it's in a tank of water,
Yeah.
about as big as this interior here. But okay, just want to stress to everybody this is being recorded live, and so keep down the idle chatter. Keep to the agenda topics. We will have a public comment period at the end, and there's no public comment sign-up sheet. Do we have anybody that's with us by telephone? Okay. All right. Our first thing that we're going to do is hear from Maxine. She's the point of contact person. Maxine.
Thank you, Larry. So I'm going to give you your status update for nuclear materials. All of our facilities are in sustained operations. H Canyon completed processing of spent nuclear fuel this fiscal year. Our fiscal year ended on September 30th with 80 bundles processed in this year and 200 bundles since the beginning of this campaign. And that's against the 1,000 that we're working for from the AROD. For the remainder of this fiscal year, H Canyon will be replacing one dissolver and making modifications to the other dissolver to allow processing of the high flux isotope reactor or HIFER fuel in FY18. So that'll allow us to do HIFER and the bundled fuel, MTR fuel, at the same time. That should start in January. The target residue material processing campaign continues. Evaluation of the H Canyon exhaust duct concrete surface degradation continues. Safety evaluations have shown that the target residue material and lab returns are acceptable for processing in H Canyon. Evaluations regarding continued processing of spent nuclear fuel are ongoing with expected results in November of this year. HB Line continues to process the plutonium feed material that was in the facility at the declaration of the potential inadequacy and safety analysis regarding the H Canyon exhaust duct. Continued processing operations are being evaluated. Due to facility differences in regards to how the exhaust duct is used for accident analysis in HB Line, this evaluation is expected to take much longer than what we're doing for H Canyon. As such, additional plutonium processing will not occur until the evaluation has been completed. K Area completed all destructive examinations, or DEs, of the 3013 containers as part of the surveillance program for long-term storage of plutonium in FY17, with 6 of those being completed. 16 kilograms of plutonium was blended down in FY17. The first DE, the destructive examination of a 3013 for FY18, has been completed. LRA continues to support fuel receipts from foreign and domestic research reactors and prepares for transfers of spent nuclear fuel to H Canyon processing in FY18. 235F continues to work removal of materials at risk and address actions for completion of the implementation plan for the Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board recommendation 2012-1. Any questions?
David Hoyle, Cab. Maxine, I don't know if this has anything to do with your facilities because they've been around an awful long time, but maybe you may know anyway. I read this week that there's a big flap concerning steel manufactured by the Kobe Steel Manufacturing Company in Japan, and the issue is that they falsified quality assurance in their steel products. So my question is, were any steel products manufactured by Kobe used at Savannah Riverside in the recent past?
I don't know the answer to that, David. I do know that we have a very big and strong counterfeit program that looks at steels and bolts and pieces of equipment. So we do have a counterfeit
No,
program.
this wasn't counterfeit. This was falsified QA.
Okay. I don't know to say yes or no if we have or haven't. So, but we do have a QA program, and I'm sure they're looking into it.
Okay, thank you.
No other questions?
Susan?
Susan Clisby, DOE. I just wanted to say for the record that Susan Corbett is online participating.
Thank you, Maxine. Just off the top of my head, I get a newsletter from Environmental Management, and I got one today that was really interesting. They showed pictures of WIP as they were making additional space by mining through the salt mine, and it was some pretty cool photographs in there. So if y'all get a chance to get that newsletter online, if you sign up for it, they'll send it to you every time a newsletter comes out, which is usually once every 10 days or 2 weeks or something like that.
What's the name of it, Larry?
Environmental Management Newsletter. I think that's all there is to it.
Susan Clisby, DOE. You mean the EM update that
Mhm.
comes? Okay, yeah, we can get you subscribed to that, and it is actually just moved to weekly publication.
Yeah.
So there's going to be more.
But it has some really cool photographs in there this time. Our recommendations are, we've got recommendation 348 H Canyon SRS SNF program. Recommendation 349 opposed consolidation interim storage, and then the infamous 350, the opposed receipt of German nuclear fuels. These are all open, and so I guess we're waiting on response from DOE from that. That's really all I've got. Does anybody else have anything? Do we have anybody from the public that would like to have a comment? That's all.
Let me just
David?
make a comment. This was a topic that came up at the last committee meeting, and it's worth repeating here, is as we're getting close to the end of the year, we'll only have one full board meeting left. Now's the time for CAB members to be forwarding to committee chairs ideas for things that they would like to hear more about or pursue in the next calendar year's work plan. And that work plan will be drawn up by committee chairs next February, I believe. And so now's the time to get your ideas in.
Thank you, David. It's also time to be thinking about who you'd like to elect for the new committee chairman. So be giving that some thought as well. Pam, while we've got a minute to kill, I guess, or two, I was going to ask David, Michael this, but he's not here, and if you don't know the answer, I can find out later. At our last meeting, we had a kind of a fracas over the way the voting went,
Yes, sir.
and I'm just wondering if, I think Michael was going to check and see if there was or am I correct in thinking we have 3 ways to vote, as opposed, in favor, and abstaining?
I think we did discuss that. We are going to go to paper ballots in the future. We're going to eliminate the raising your hand.
Mhm.
I think what we concluded, Susan, help me if I'm wrong here. I think it was just yay or nay. I don't recall that the abstain option is
Well,
in
you can always
the,
abstain.
Yeah, my understanding was that the ballot would be yea or nay, but then you could also opt not to vote, in which case it would be.
But the thing about
I don't think it was abstaining. It was
just tabling.
Yeah,
I think that somebody wrote in.
Somebody wrote
well,
in
it was a write-in
table,
ballot.
yeah.
That was the
Yeah,
problem.
that would have
she
needed
left.
to come out in discussion. It couldn't come out during a vote.
Yeah,
Right, because that
Yeah.
wasn't the question at hand.
exactly.
Right. She left and she left a piece of paper, but it wasn't, that's, even there, I think that's why we'd go to a paper ballot in the future if somebody felt like they needed to leave, and then they would have a paper ballot, and then they would check. Her wording was not clear,
Mhm.
and that's what caused some of the confusion,
Okay.
So,
in addition to the re-votes.
so what you're talking about is paper ballots for absentee.
No, we're talking about paper ballots for everybody.
Well, I don't think that's such a good idea. I think that's tilting way too far. I think if somebody's gonna vote absentee, then yes, a paper ballot would make things clearer. But for people that are there, we raise our hand, that's all that's needed. In fact, I think it's useful for the public to see who's voting in what manner.
Yeah, I agree.
Excuse me, I don't understand that. I think the public needs to know what our final decision is, not who did what, and point to somebody, because they have a certain predilection for an opinion, David. I don't think that's anything we want to do. I noticed that after this last vote, I told Larry he's a celebrity because he got in the paper a bunch of times. And everybody, several of the cab members got interviewed, which was good, right? And if they chose to do that, it's good. But I like the paper ballot so that if somebody's in there and they feel very strongly about an issue, but then they could say, I vote against it, they could point at him and say, he's against it, right? I don't think that's a good idea.
Well, I wasn't trying to put people on the spot in that regard. I think the public deserves to know. I mean, this is all about public involvement, and
Oh, I agree.
that's an aspect. There's virtually no other cab that does paper balloting. Why would we?
Well, I guess the reason it's come up is because of the fracas that we had at the
And I
last meeting.
understand that for absentees,
Yeah.
yeah.
But it
Yeah.
wasn't just the absentee balloting that caused the confusion the last time. It was the
Right.
hand count and the changing of votes, which was more problematic.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
The absentee ballot didn't change the end result,
Right.
no matter how you interpreted it.
Yeah, I had
part of it-
I had a view of what was going wrong, and someone, as we were going around the table, was a very late hand raising, and then that same individual actually voted for it, and then raised their hand to vote against it. So they totally messed it up and trying to give the feedback during the meeting, and obviously we did get the feedback that something went wrong with that vote, and we needed to back up the truck and get it right. So I don't know what happened with that individual, and I'm not going to single them out. It's just, it happened. I certainly didn't want to see that vote having to be taken 5-6 times, and either way it went, it would just be closure at that point. But
Yeah.
And I
it was
think
just awkward.
it is. I think part of it is just the clarity. When there's a call for a motion and call for a second, it just got facilitated differently this time than normal. And what happened when I spoke to that individual was when the facilitator made it, it sounded different to that person. So it heard it one way, and then when she realized how it just, I don't think we need to go to paper ballots for that, but I think we just need to standardize how we say it. Raise your hand, yes, if you support this, no, if you don't support it. But I think if we change the wording, that's where the confusion for that person came in. I think we also need to make sure, when we say it, raise your hand up high and keep it high, and then the facilitator who's ever doing it needs to be very clear. Now you can put your hands down, and now we're going to move on to the second. I do agree, though, that if we move to paper, not that it's singling a person out or not, I'm worried about the logistics of it, because when you have the paper, you have to have the DOE federal coordinator, and then the chair or vice chair have to count them and certify them and then bring it back. So if we do paper ballots, we would have to build in probably an extra 10 or 15 minutes for that counting to happen.
Okay, you're probably only counting 18 though. It's kind of a.
You have
Yeah.
to go. You have to go out of the room though,
Yeah,
and
I
it
know,
has
but
to be. So it's just like if we're doing like last month. How many did we have? 5? Did we have 4 or 5 that we voted on? It was 4. So for each of those, we'd have to write them down. For each one, we'd have to leave, count, recount, certify, and bring it back.
I don't know any reason why you'd have to leave the room. Usually they just go up in the front and they're counting them. So.
They have to be done outside. It's in the SOPs. It has to be done outside of viewing area to
Uh,
make sure it's official.
I'm confident that this can be discussed at the next executive meeting.
Which will be good.
But that is the recommendation at this juncture.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, I have an online comment from Susan Corbett. She said, I don't think someone who abstains the first vote can change their vote, and she agrees that the public needs to see who's voting how.
Thank you.
Doug Howard Cap, if we did go to paper ballots, how long, I mean, are they going to be held on record for a extended time? Or are they going to, I mean, how is that going to work as far as after we vote using those paper ballots? How long will they be held? Are they going to be archived or what?
We really hadn't discussed that. I think it's just a matter, again, of making sure we have clarity of the vote. And as Nina said, if you have at least 2 or even 3 individuals counting them, then, and they all agree that that's the vote, I'm not aware that there'd be a purpose for keeping them, but that has not been specifically discussed.
Well, going off what Nina was saying, that the person was confused, as I sit here and look at that recommendation on the screen there, the first word in the recommendation is oppose. So you have a couple of double negatives there, so you don't know if you're voting to oppose it or if you're voting, it is confusing. So maybe that was.
Well, I think that particular recommendation was well vetted, and I think people knew what they were voting for.
You're right. Absolutely.
Larry, just one comment on going from hand balloting to paper balloting. I don't believe one incident really is precedent to throw it all out. I mean, we have traditionally done this, and we would be, I'll take it at your word, David, that we'd be one of the only cabs that would go to paper balloting. And I think we should all kind of know where we stand on certain topics, because it's always brought very good conversation amongst ourselves. And I think so far, everyone that I've seen on the cab, we've been very civil to one another, even when we're in total disagreement of one another's opinion. And that's perfectly healthy.
So I'd like to make one comment, if I could, Tom French. We can't go by what other cabs do, because other cabs operate totally different than we do. Each one has their own set of standard operating procedures, and they have all kinds of stuff we really wouldn't want to do. So we can't point and say, well, they don't do it, so we shouldn't either. I think we need to be very careful about that. Because there are very, very different operations at every site.
Well, I think you'd be surprised at how similar they are. There are some that are way out there, but most of them are very similar.
Well, I know that's why we can't say we're the only one that doesn't or does, right? There are some very different ones out there.
Well, I've read them all, and none of them have paper ballot.
Well, I know, but I mean, they do all kinds of other things we wouldn't do, right? So.
Well, I think that Dan had a good point. This is a very isolated incident. And I think if we're just careful about how we handle it and we're aware from here on out, we may be overreacting. But there again, that's something that'll be brought up at the executive committee, and it'll be settled at that time. And probably we probably won't have a heck of a lot of choice on it anyway. I think the DDFOs will probably make that choice for us. But we'll see what happens.
No. Anything like that would have to be in our standard operating procedure, and that has to be voted on by the full board.
Okay.
Can I change the subject? I have a question for
Sure.
Maxine.
Yeah.
Going back to actual work, the H Canyon Tunnel air shaft,
Exhaust duct, yes, sir.
exhaust duct, is under a lot of study. Do they have an idea when they can actually do the canyon study and have it finished, that it's safe for operation?
So they're working on that justification for continued operations right now.
Okay.
That's due to the department in November.
Oh, okay.
So the H Canyon piece. The piece that is going to take a little bit longer is the piece with HB line operations, because HB line is a totally different scenario, much smaller tanks, more potential for the issue is if there were an earthquake. And the tunnel were to collapse. And HB line needs that tunnel as part of its safety significant equipment. So it's going to take a little bit longer for that analysis to be done. They actually have to do a nonlinear analysis in order to prove that it will withstand an earthquake.
Okay, but the canyon, they're going to give you something, DOE something by November?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Would there be a chance for an update at the November meeting?
What's the date of the November meeting?
14.
17th, I think.
That's what it's due.
Is that by design?
No. No, it's actually not. I'd like it a lot sooner than November.
It's actually Monday the 13th.
The 13th.
Yeah.
I think it's due to us around the 17th, so the middle of the month. If we have it sooner, we'll definitely give you an update in Jack's talking points. If we don't, we'll get it out to you as soon as we can.
If I may, Tony Polk, Department of Energy. So to be clear, a couple of things are going on relative to the canyon exhaust duct. The JCO that was mentioned is what we need to have in place to be able to continue operations. What we've done so far has been temporary relative to approvals, and the JCO documents formally what has to be done in the way of actions for us to continue under the conditions that we found relative to the to the exhaust duct. The second part of that is what we're doing to understand whether or not the exhaust duct can still perform the function that it was intended to in a seismic event. And so there are really a series of things that are going on. One of those is an early analysis that is qualitative in nature that took the materials from the core samples that we had. We gave those to the laboratory. They performed some analyses on those, and they have a report that is in draft now that is qualitative in nature relative to that analysis, and we expect those results formally on the 3rd, I believe the 3rd of November. Okay. When we get those, we'll have to take a look, both the department and the contractor, at those results to understand whether or not there's enough information there that says that we can take a course other than the one we're on right now with the JCO.
Okay.
Further down the line, there's additional testing analyses, I should say, that are going to take place. And Maxine mentioned those. It is primarily a nonlinear analysis, structural analysis of the exhaust duct to understand how it will perform under dynamic situations in a seismic event. That is a longer process. In fact, we estimated that about a month and a half or so ago to take anywhere from about 12 to 18 months to be able to complete. So we really have a few things that are going on, and we will even have some early information out of that. But at each step along the way, we'll have more information and be able to determine whether or not we either have a situation that's going to require something in the future to be done so that we can continue to operate at maximum throughput in the facility, or it will let us know that the canyon exhaust duct is still okay, meets the requirements, and therefore we can back out of the PISA and look more longer term at how we would continue to monitor the degradation as we move forward, understanding that we may have to do something in the future.
Gotcha.
Okay.
All right. Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Anything else? Well, since we have no public comments and we have no further business, I would say that the meeting is adjourned.